Our next speaker is more of a student of daily life. She works on ceramics, and it's Professor Kathleen Lynch, professor of classics at the University of Cincinnati. She focuses on ancient Greek ceramics, and she has done archaeological fieldwork around the Mediterranean in Greece, Albania, Turkey, Italy, and maybe a few other places that I don't know about. Kathleen's research considers what ancient ceramics can tell us about their use and users. And she uses some of the nicest ceramics that you'll ever see, which is good. And she's written a book, The Symposium in Context, which won the 2011 James Weissman Award. And of all the committees I've been on in my long career, the one, I just missed it by a year. But I'm sure I would have awarded it the prize too. Anyway, today she will talk about Athenian pottery in Achaemenid lands. Kathleen.
Thank you, Professor Carter, and thank you all, Rahim and Alexa. This is really, truly a dream to be a Getty Scholar, and one of the best things about it is being able to dig into scholarship and really go after the rabbit holes that open up. I have opened up many new doors to my research, new avenues of thought here, and I had a hard time choosing which one to lead you through today. So you're going to see glimpses of open doors as we go through, and I look forward to talking to you about them after in the question and answer period. But keep something in mind, as Dr. Carter just said, I, like my pottery, am a visitor to Persian lands. I come from Greece, and so I hope that you'll find areas where there are obvious things that I have missed because I'm coming at this from an outsider's perspective. Okay, so all goods carry meaning, but none by itself. Meaning is in the relationship of all goods. Mary Douglas and Baron Isherwood offered this simple but powerful statement in their revolutionary book, The World of Goods, 40 years ago. We take this as a given today, but reminders that value is endowed by the agreement of fellow consumers provide important calibrations on our study of material culture. Even something like this hastily decorated black figure skyphos can have meaning and value in the right context. This paper will examine Athenian-made figured pottery exported to locations in the Achaemenid Empire. My work as a Getty Scholar seeks to understand the value and significance of Athenian pottery among residents in the Achaemenid Empire. To do so, as Mary Douglas urges us, we need to determine Athenian pottery's relationship to other goods. In order to set the scene, I will first speak briefly about the production and export of Athenian pottery. Then we will turn to evidence for its distribution in Achaemenid-controlled lands. The popularity of the foreign pottery, I will suggest, may be in its ability to express non-Achaemenid messages of identity. Athens possesses an unparalleled quality of clay, which its potters exploited for millennia. The clay allowed them to form vessels of elegant and complicated shapes, and to decorate the vessels with a dilute clay, a slip. But the secret was in the kiln, and a three-stage firing of oxidation, reduction, and oxidation allowed the body of the vessel to fire a brilliant orange color, and the surfaces covered with the slip a lustrous black. The quality of the potting alone is extraordinary, but what makes the vessels especially compelling is their figural decorations. In fact, the idea of painting not just figures, but narrative scenes on ceramics occurs rarely within the world. Together, the potting and painting of these remarkable vessels elevates them to the realm of art, despite their utilitarian forms and function. The Athenians used this fineware pottery in their everyday lives, and many of the forms found special use in the Symposium, a wine drinking party. Rules governed the drinking, including the necessity of diluting the wine with water for only uncivilized barbarians drank their wine straight. Every man reclined and drank together in rounds. The focus on wine drinking, not food, and the goal of equality distinguished the Greek Symposium from other types of diacritical banquets and drinking. The most common Athenian fineware forms, then, were designed for the Symposium, such as the kylix, which is a stemmed drinking cup, seen here, designed to facilitate drinking while reclining. There's also the crater, the mixing bowl into which the wine and water was poured, and oinakoi for pouring the dilute wine into the kylixes. By the way, on the oinakoi, you see the inevitable effects of drinking a lot of wine. Please don't make me point it out to you. On the surface, then, Athenian fineware pottery appears to serve the needs of a uniquely Greek cultural event. However, a large quantity of Athenian pottery was exported. The Greek vases that fill museums around the world, including the beautiful ones at the Getty Villa, such as these, were rarely found in Athens, but rather come from export contexts. Modern Italy formed the largest market for Greek vases, where Etruscans, Bucetians, Daunians, Sicels, and colonial Greeks, among others, included these pots in their tomb offerings. Clear signs, such as non-Athenian shapes and specialized iconography, indicate that the Western market had a decisive impact on pottery production in Athens. For example, this odd Athenian vase on display at the Getty Villa is a nestorus, a shape used by South Italian cultures and unknown in the Greek pottery repertoire. It demonstrates that Athenian potters went to some length to market their wares to Italic customers. So much for the better studied Western trade, which ranged far beyond Italy to the Pillars of Hercules in Iberia. What about the Eastern market? My study of the imported Greek pottery at Gordion in central Anatolia drew me to this question. Gordion, the former Phrygian capital, came under Persian rule around 540 BC, and simultaneously Athenian pottery began to flow into the city. Turning finally to Athenian pottery from Achaemenid sites, this subject includes some extraordinary objects, like this Athenian rhyton from a tomb in Meroe in far Upper Egypt. The red figure Amazonamaki on the cup portion echoes the molded Amazon riding a horse, and in this Amazonamaki, a Persian rider joins the Amazons to trounce the Greeks. This rhyton from Memphis in Egypt, also signed by Sotades as potter, features choroplastic figures of an Easterner leading a camel. The red figure decoration again depicts a battle in which Greeks are losing, but this time purely at the hands of the Persians. In a similar vein are distinctive audience scenes, such as this one on a red figure Lekathos from Vouni and Cyprus, and this one on a red figure Pelike from an exceptionally elite tome in Caria. And I thank Jeff Spears for pointing me on to this one. I apologize for the poor image, but despite its importance, it remains unpublished. It features an enthroned man dressed in Eastern costume as a Greek-dressed woman approaches, followed by another Eastern garb figure. A fan bearer stands behind the throne. These distinctive iconographies illustrate one thread in the pattern of Athenian pottery in the East. These vessels and the rhyta most likely represent gifts, even commissioned gifts, rather than normal trade. For our purposes, these demonstrate that in the right circumstances, a Greek vase could be an appropriate gift to an elite Achaemenid subject. In fact, several Sotadian rhyta made it all the way out to the capital at Susa, but individually and undoubtedly as gifts, perhaps even from an Athenian. But beyond Greeks bearing gifts, I am more interested in structured trade of Athenian pottery to the East. And by trade, I mean movement of larger quantities of pottery for sale to customers. This level of exchange provides insight into topics of meaning and value among a broader population of users. I will present some case studies, then we'll situate the patterns in the material cultural context of the Achaemenid world. But first, some comments on chronology. Athenian pottery is inherently and highly datable, so we can track its importation to a site with confidence, even if the piece is found later in a higher archaeological stratum. And now I apologize for this potted history, but it has a point. A reminder that in 550 BC, Cyrus conquered the Medians, setting in motion the birth of the Achaemenid Empire. In 547 BC, he seized Sardis in Lydia, and by the last decade of the 6th century, the empire spanned from Thrace to the Indus to northern Africa. For this paper today, the important distinction will be pre-Achaemenid and Achaemenid period of use of Athenian pottery. For example, Athenian pottery at Sardis dating before 550 would fall into the pre-Achaemenid use period. As we look at the map of the Achaemenid Empire, we have already discussed the single vases that appear at various locations. They are the black dots on the map. Second, Greek cities in the Eastern Mediterranean also received Athenian pottery in abundance. These areas, green on the map, include the entrepôts of Naucratis in Egypt and possibly Almina in the Levant, but also polis, such as Clazomenae and Smyrna along the coast of Asia Minor. These sites, these Greek sites, indicate that Athenian pottery had a market in the East among a population with a cultural affinity to its producers. More interesting for us is that third category, non-Greek sites that also imported Athenian pottery. These are red on the map. Notably, these red areas include a range of different cultural groups, from the Lycians to the Lydians and the Phoenicians to the Phrygians, the polyethnic foundation of the Achaemenid Empire. The map reveals one obvious conclusion. Coastal sites had more interest in Athenian pottery than those inland. In fact, in Israel, a mere 40 kilometers separates the haves from the have-nots. Thus, when a large quantity of Athenian pottery occurs inland, it requires some explanation, which it does at Gordion. We'll return to this later in the paper. But returning to chronology, the pre-Achaemenid interest in Athenian pottery may be one key to understanding its cultural significance during the Achaemenid period. Importantly, Athenian pottery did not expand its reach into new areas during the Achaemenid period, but rather increased only at sites which were already familiar with it. This points to another key to its cultural use and meaning. Athenian pottery did not play a role in the package of Achaemenid elite material culture, so well studied by my colleague today, Professor Root, Elsbeth Dusenberry, Margaret Miller, and many others. The Persianized elite of the empire selectively adopted elements of Achaemenid elite court style and behavior in order to align themselves with Persian power. For example, at Sardis during the Achaemenid period, Lydian burial customs continued, but grave goods included locally made jewelry and metalware based on Persian models. On the right are objects from a looted tomb or tombs near Sardis. On the left is a spectacular gold and silver amphora on view at the villa. In fact, it's hard to imagine any use of ceramic vessels by the highest status elites in the Achaemenid Empire. Ctesias, by way of Athenaeus, claimed that, this is so funny it's hard for me to say it, among the Persians, whomever the king holds in contempt drinks from terracotta cups. So this Athenian pottery had no role. This indicates that Athenian pottery had no role in the calculated elite use of Achaemenid material culture. It did not support new cultural needs directly related to the Achaemenid rule. Instead, the pattern of importation of Athenian pottery to sites with pre-existing consumption suggests that its use related to indigenous cultural impulses that continued under the Achaemenid rule. Achaemenid political strategy of autonomy for conquered sites meant that local groups maintained deeply rooted cultural activities, including burial traditions, religion, and social structures. In the same way, the role Athenian pottery played at the local level seems to have continued under the Achaemenids. Clues to local value and meaning come from preferred shapes, figure decoration, and general use context of Athenian vessels. In this section, I will present a few case studies which provide a sample of patterns and variations in the patterns of importation. Then we will return to the question of meaning. Xanthos is our first site. It is the Greek name for a Lycian town in Southeast Asia Minor. The Achaemenid general Harpagus conquered the city in 540 BC, but before 550 BC, that is, before the Achaemenid period starts, approximately 9 Athenian vases arrived. Among them are a column crater and a neck amphora, the two you see on the screen. Note the courting imagery on the black figure crater, a distinctly Greek subject. The handful of vessels, I think, also represents exchange and not wholesale trade. Despite the self-destruction of the city during the conquest of Harpagus, the number of Athenian vessels goes up in the second half of the 6th century. The numbers now reach the level of trade. However, the shapes used at Xanthos are not the same as those used at sites in Rhodes, the island that lies just across from it, or at Greek sites north of the city of Xanthos. Therefore, it was not receiving trickle-down trade. The Lycians were making choices. For example, they have a great interest in laconis lids. Laconides are covered bowls for holding trinkets and I think also for serving food, but the flat lid of them provided a nice space for decoration, and you see over here pieces of one of these flat lids. This is weird. Overall, iconography on the Athenian vessels favors Amazons and Heracles, together in one case but mainly separately, or references to the world of Dionysus. And this one, I hope you can see it, is a satyr harvesting grapes. He's cutting grapes and he's putting them into the basket, and then Dionysus awaits the product over here. But at least 6 vessels depict Greek gods, such as the column crater fragments on the right. Even though it's fragmentary, you can identify the attributes of Hermes and Poseidon. Like the early black figure crater, this red figure calyx crater again shows a distinctively Greek scene of male courting. In fact, Xanthos received more specific iconography in shapes than any other non-Greek Achaemenid site in the East. Nevertheless, the actual quantity of Athenian pottery must have been minuscule. The local pottery remains unpublished, of course, but only 200 or so fragments of Athenian pottery have been published from Xanthos. Comparing that to our second site, Tel Dor. Tel Dor is a coastal site in the Levant, and it provides our second example. The city was under the control of Phoenician Sidon, a Persian client kingdom. Similar to Xanthos, the first Attic pots arrive one by one, probably as gifts. The trade begins around 500 BC, so some decades after the arrival of the Achaemenid period. Throughout the site, excavators have found a total of 411 fragments, again, not many. The most frequent shapes are red figure craters, black figure cups, and scyphoi, and a few closed vessels, but none of those black figure laconis lids, underscoring how odd Xanthos is in this preference. The iconography on pots from Dor features more generic scenes than at Xanthos, like this cup with a ubiquitous Heracles and the Nemean lion. You're looking at it and you're saying, no, that's not what that is. But it is. So this is the haunches of the lion, and this is Heracles' hand. It's such a conventional image that even from this kind of degenerate fragment, you can tell exactly what it was. That's how ubiquitous this scene was, both in the East and at home in Athens. One exception is this fragment of a late 5th century bell crater with Heracles in the garden of the Hesperides. I've highlighted the tree at center with the snake wrapped around it, Laudon, guarding the apples. Also notable at Dor is a true dearth of Amazons compared to Xanthos. One thing I do want to emphasize, which I just alluded to, is that the imagery on Athenian vases in the East is quite different from that on vases exported to the West. The Western market imported a greater variety of much more sophisticated narrative scenes. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the picture is quite different. We have already seen the Sotodean Raita that must have been special commissions and gifts to Achaemenid elites in Egypt. Other exceptional pieces may not have been commissioned per se, but nevertheless gifts. These include a pre-Achaemenid period black figure volute crater by Clytius. Its 2 known fragments were purchased in Luxor in Cairo. The left fragment shows Odysseus' escape from the cave of Polyphemus, and the right, Perseus in the Gorgons. Cups by Clytius are known from the Greek trading place at Naucratis, but this is his only large vessel in Egypt, and it's the same shape as the Francois vase. So these, along with a handful of other Athenian closed black figure vessels, documents the presence of Athenian pottery in Egypt before the Achaemenids. After the conquest of Egypt in 524, the pattern of import hardly changes. As impressive as the Clytius crater, this large red-figured volute crater has the return of Hephaestus, and it's been attributed to the Altamira painter. It comes from the necropolis at Saqqara, although fine details are scarce, we wish we had them, and the pictures are poor because it too remains unpublished. Otherwise, small quantities of Athenian lekythoi, craters, closed vessels, and drinking cups arrived to Egypt. Egypt's overall lack of interest in Athenian pottery reinforces the role of local desire in consumption patterns. If Egyptians wanted Attic pottery, they could have had it, just like the Phoenician and Lycian sites. That Greek trading post at Naucratis provided ample access. Today, I'm not considering Naucratis, where we know Greeks used Greek pottery in conventional Greek ways before and during the Achaemenid period. But at Naucratis, an estimated 2,000 fragments of Greek pottery have been discovered, while only 450 come from the entire remainder of Egypt. So, slim number. My final example is the site that brought me to these questions, Gordion in central Anatolia, the former capital of the Phrygian Empire. The pattern of Athenian pottery here reminds us most of Xanthos, but also reveals some surprises. The first anomaly relates to its location, 500 kilometers or more from a coast. The residents of Gordion desired Athenian pottery sufficiently to seek it out. And in fact, I believe that merchants from Gordion went out to the coast of the Propontis, where the Greek colony of Cyzicus may have been their source. The overall character of Athenian pottery from Gordion most resembles that of Daskalion, the satrapal capital of Hellespontine Phrygia, which is on the way to Cyzicus. I have cataloged approximately 2,000 Athenian fragments from Gordion, and even if they represent half as many actual pots, this number underscores the strong desire for Athenian pottery within the social life of Gordion. Like other sites, Gordion received Athenian pottery before the Achaemenid conquest, but only in a small quantity, such as this fragmentary crater associated with Lydos, as well as the eponymous Gordion cups. Gordion cup is a term used for a certain type of kylix, and the eponymous ones come from Gordion. The one on the left is signed by Clytius and Ergotimos, the creators of the Francois vase. Then, during the Achaemenid period, Athenian pottery arrived at a gallop. The most popular figured Athenian shape during this period was the crater, and as an example of many, I show you the unmistakable fragments of a Busiris scene. Next come oil vases, including lekythoi, and then drinking vessels. There are some closed vessels, such as the oinokoi on the right with a musician, but these are much fewer. Another surprise is this white ground cup by the Penthesilea painter, which shows a woman with her arm around a winged youth. And I know it's hard to see, so here is an enhanced version. This, by the way, this is not blood. These are the fringes of the fillet coming down here. This is likely Aphrodite and Eros, and I wonder if in Gordion, a Phrygian viewer might see their great goddess Cybele and her consort Attis. We have to leave room for divergent readings of these images, despite the Athenian potter's intentions. The Gordion fragment is one of 7 white ground cups known to me from the Achaemenid East. And altogether, we know of only 125 white ground cups. By comparison, the Beasley Archive database has 14,000 red figure cups. 14,000 red figure cups, 125 white ground cups. Greek find spots for white ground cups identify them as dedications in sanctuaries or graves. as very special objects. And here, I hope you will indulge me in a quick footnote. So this is another one of those serendipitous discoveries I found while doing my work here at the Getty. One of the 7 Eastern fragments comes from Babylon and from an excavated context from the Temple of Ninurta. It shows a white horse with a clear eye, and if we had a color photograph, this eye would probably be blue, just like on the horse from the Sotades Raiton in Meroe, you see here. And not knowing anything about horses, I contacted a friend who does know everything about horses, Beth Dusenberry, and she was able to tell me that we can reconstruct from this small fragment that this too is going to be an Amazon rider, because Amazons famously rode white horses with blue eyes, and this is a kind of breed that continues to be admired even down to today. So even this Amazon warrior may have been a relevant gift to Ninurta, the war and agricultural god. But back to Gordion. Athenian pottery, figured and plain black glaze. Note that I'm talking today only about figured pottery. There's another component to the trade, which is plain black gloss, and I'm not including that today. But when we add figure and black gloss together, it comprised only 1.4% of the total ceramic assemblage at Gordion, or 7% of the fineware assemblage during the period of Achaemenid rule. This means that its use was not widespread, but probably restricted to a few. The case of Gordion then leads to several potential conclusions and many more questions. It should be clear by now that the Eastern interest in Athenian pottery increased during the Achaemenid period, even in Egypt, where the uptick was modest. However, since Athenian pottery did not participate in the suite of the highest Achaemenid status indicators, how do we explain the increase? An increase in trade reflects an increase in desire for the goods. Or in the case of Egypt, the slight evidence for trade reflects an absence of desire. Remember that value is endowed by the agreement of fellow consumers. Even though the sites encompass a variety of indigenous cultures, they consistently valued Athenian pottery as culturally useful to them. Christophe Clermont, the first scholar to gather Athenian pottery found in the Near East in a 1955 article, notes that modern scholars would not value most of this pottery. He sniffed. The quality of the sherds is, generally speaking, poor. That may be true when you are comparing the majority of the Athenian pottery traded east with the pottery traded west. But for an Eastern consumer, Athenian pottery was truly exceptional. At Gordion, local products included gray, darker gray, and occasionally buff. This, by the way, is a color photograph. So to possess Athenian pottery was to make a statement about one's knowledge and access to the greater world. But here is the important point. The local users of these Athenian pots did not want to be Greek or play at being Greek. This is not Hellenization. The Eastern users did not hold symposia. Instead, the pots arrived as empty vessels, ready to be filled with localized meaning by their users. The distinctively foreign vessels, perhaps, allowed users to express connections with the West instead of the East, recalling connections that predated the arrival of the mighty power from a distant land. From the Achaemenid point of view, the quiet expression of self-identity raised no concern, for it was pottery. It was only pottery after all. This is a good place to mention the artistic style that blends Greek, Achaemenid, and local cultural elements, a style problematically called Greco-Persian. One of the few new buildings erected during the Achaemenid period at Gordion was a tiny semi-subterranean religious building. It's that tiny, tiny square in between two other buildings. It was decorated with megalographic frescoes of women in so-called Greco-Persian style. Greco-Persian style objects, whether seals, wall paintings, or sculptures, put the patron at the geographical center of the world by expressing knowledge of both East and West. This is a clever and calculated choice and in no way privileges the Greeks. In fact, the Greeks become the other, to be used by indigenous people to say something meaningful about themselves. I consider the use of Athenian pottery as an extension of this idea. The small quantity of Athenian pottery imported to these Achaemenid period sites, however, means that not every resident of Tel Dor or Gordion used Athenian pottery. Its relative scarcity suggests rationed use among some internal group. At Gordion, I have wondered if that group consisted of the old Phrygian families who recalled the heady days of their former Phrygian power and their actual ancestor, King Midas, who was married to a Greek princess. In fact, believe it or not, this tiny, tiny fragment from Gordion is a scene of Midas questioning a restrained Silenus. So you see the furry arm here and the binding? It's this portion here of a black figure cup. I have cheated, by the way, because this is a Laconian black figure cup, but I think you get my point. Use of very Greek Athenian pottery may have formed a touchstone for compromised identities at Gordion. Finally, to compound the cultural entanglement of the Athenian pottery, we cannot dismiss the idea that the same elites who chose to adopt the suite of Achaemenid material culture in one social context, such as the use of seals, could adorn their table with local ceramics and an Athenian vase or two on another occasion. This kind of entanglement and agency recognizes that discrepant identities can coexist, and people employ them according to the goals of a particular social context. To end, I cite another truism from Douglas and Isherwood. Consumption is not compelled. The choice to use one type of object instead of another meaningfully constructs a cultural message. Athenian pottery provides particularly sensitive insight into choice since it projects both aesthetic messages through its decoration and social messages through its cultural use. Now, since we're here in Southern California, there's an obvious modern analogy for this. The Kardashians may be an extreme, but like the ancient users of fine Athenian pottery, they understood the principle of consumer choice and the meaning of goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the talks a lot. On the business of Amazons in Lycia in particular, there is, of course, the Bellerophontes story in Homer, and so Amazons are a good subject in Lycia. Do you think that's relevant?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. The topic of one of the doors that I left ajar that we did not walk through was the specificity of the iconography. And my predecessor at Gordion, Keith DeVries, had published a paper in which he did suggest that there was a tendency for, there was a prevalence of Amazon scenes in the East. And I would like to refine that and say that in some places there's a prevalence for Amazon scenes like Xanthos in Lycia. But when you look at the distribution of Amazon scenes, more go west than east. So that's why, talking about comparative context, we have to be careful on the way we ask the question. But I do think that, I think Xanthos there's something special going on with Xanthos because the things that they are receiving, both shapes and images, are much more in line with the specific things that Greeks are interested in, like those courting scenes. That's weird to have within, but it's acknowledging knowledge of a Greek way of life that is meaningfully and specific to the Greeks. But thank you for that. That's yeah.
It's my sad duty to bring this discussion to an end, but you can continue outside, have a little break, and get ready for the next round, where we'll have several more speeches, 4 more speeches. Oh, at 4 o'clock. Oh, at 4 o'clock.